The attic had always been Thomas's domain. In our 45 years of marriage, I'd rarely ventured into that dusty realm of forgotten Christmas decorations and weathered memorabilia. But now, 6 months after his funeral, I found myself standing at the bottom of the fold-down ladder, staring up into the darkness. "You don't have to do this today, Mom," my daughter Lizzie said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "The house isn't going anywhere." At 68, I was finally selling our Victorian home in Millfield. It had grown too large, too full of echoes for just me. The 3-bedroom condo near Lizzie and her family waited, its neutral walls a blank canvas for whatever remained of my life. "I can't leave it all for you kids to sort through when I'm gone," I replied, straightening my spine. "Besides, your father was many things, but a hoarder wasn't one of them." How bad could it be? Lizzie's husband called her away to discuss something with the realtor downstairs, and I seized the moment of privacy to begin my ascent. Each step creaked under my weight, a grumbling reminder of my intrusion into a space that had never been mine. The air in the attic hung heavy with dust and the peculiar smell of old paper. Weak light filtered through the single window, illuminating dancing dust motes. I pulled the chain on the bare overhead bulb, and the space reluctantly revealed itself. Thomas had been more organized than I'd expected. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, each labeled in his precise handwriting. Christmas, tax records 1980 to 1990, family photos, camping equipment. I smiled, recognizing the methodical mind of the high school principal who had run Millfield High with the same orderly efficiency for 30 years. I started with the Christmas decorations, sorting what I'd keep for the new place and what would go to the children or charity. Then the photo albums, pausing occasionally to trace faces grown soft with time. My Thomas, always handsome, always proper, his salt and pepper hair never out of place, even in vacation snapshots. It was behind a stack of old suitcases that I found it. A lockbox about the size of a shoebox, made of burnished silver metal, tucked far back in the eaves where the roof sloped to meet the floor. No label, no dust either, I noticed, running my finger across its top. This box had been handled recently. The key was taped to its underside. That detail struck me as odd. Thomas hadn't been a secretive man. We had shared everything: bank accounts, email passwords, even the combination to the gun safe in the basement. Why hide this? Inside, the box held a collection of seemingly unrelated items: a small leather-bound journal, a stack of letters bound with faded blue ribbon, a man's silver wristwatch I'd never seen Thomas wear, and a USB drive. I opened the journal first, recognizing Thomas's distinctive script immediately. The entries began 30 years ago, 1994, and continued sporadically until just weeks before his heart attack last January. March 15th, 1994. I saw her today, after all these years, standing in line at Forrester's Pharmacy with a little boy clutching her hand. My heart nearly stopped. She didn't notice me, or pretended not to. The boy must be almost 8 now, dark hair, my chin, my father's eyes. No doubt in my mind. What would June say if she knew? What would it do to Lizzie and Mark? This secret must remain buried, as it has for the past 8 years, for everyone's sake. My hands trembled as I read the words again. Thomas, my Thomas, the steady, reliable man who had never missed a mortgage payment, never forgotten an anniversary, never raised his voice in anger. The man who led yearly seminars on ethics for his teaching staff. The journal fell from my shaking hands. I stared, unseeing, at the darkened beams above me, trying to make sense of what I'd just read. A child. Thomas had fathered a child before Lizzie was born. A child he had hidden from me our entire marriage. I don't know how long I sat there, dust settling on my shoulders, before I could bring myself to pick up the leather-bound book again. The entries were scattered across years, sometimes with months between them. Each one a small window into a Thomas I had never known. November 12th, 1996. Ran into Carolyn at the education conference in Columbus. She didn't seem surprised to see me. Said she'd heard I became principal at Millfield High. Then she told me Daniel is doing well in school. Gifted in mathematics, apparently. Like me. She didn't ask for anything, didn't make accusations. Just shared that small detail, mother to father, before walking away. I couldn't sleep at all that night. February 9th, 2001. Daniel would be starting high school next year. Not at my school, thank God for small mercies. Carolyn has kept her word all these years, never asking for acknowledgement, money, or contact. I looked her up online. She's a partner at her law firm now. Seems to have done well for herself. For them. Sometimes I wonder who he's becoming. This boy with my blood, who doesn't know my name. As I read on, a picture emerged of my husband's secret life. Not the sordid affair I might have imagined, but something perhaps more painful. A mistake made before he met me. A woman who never demanded recognition, and a child who grew up without knowing his biological father. The journal revealed Thomas's silent vigil through the years, chronicling small glimpses of Daniel's life from afar. His graduation announcement from Ohio State with honors that Thomas had somehow obtained. His wedding announcement from the Columbus Dispatch. The birth of a daughter in 2018, making Thomas a grandfather to a child he'd never meet. I set the journal aside and untied the ribbon around the stack of letters. They were all addressed to Daniel Sullivan, but none had ever been mailed. The earliest was dated for his 10th birthday. The most recent was marked for his 35th birthday, just 3 months after Thomas died. With trembling fingers, I opened the first one. Dear Daniel, you don't know me, but today you are 10 years old. I wonder what that looks like. If you're having a party, if you've outgrown the dinosaur phase most boys go through. If you've inherited my hopeless ineptitude at sports, I want you to know that I think about you, that I wonder about these things, that your existence matters to me, even though circumstances have made it impossible for me to be in your life. When you're older, perhaps you'll understand the complicated choices adults sometimes make, or perhaps you'll judge me harshly. You would have that right. I hope your day is filled with cake and laughter and everything a 10-year-old boy could wish for. Thomas Sullivan. Inside the same envelope was a photograph, a school portrait of a solemn boy with dark hair that fell across his forehead just like Thomas's had in our wedding pictures. I could see my husband in the shape of his face, the set of his jaw. Letter after letter revealed the same pattern. Thomas's one-sided communication with a son who never knew he existed. Birthday wishes, life advice, congratulations on achievements Thomas had learned about secondhand. Apologies, so many apologies for his absence. The watch, I learned from a later letter, had belonged to Thomas's father. He had intended to pass it down to Daniel someday, though he never found the courage to make contact. The final item in the box, the USB drive, contained photographs, news clippings, a copy of Daniel's wedding announcement, a birth announcement for Sophia Rose Lucas, Daniel's daughter, and several folders of what appeared to be regular bank statements from an account I'd never known about, showing monthly payments to a C. Lucas that had begun in 1986 and ended in 2004. Child support, provided silently, without legal obligation, until Daniel had turned 21. When Lizzie found me, I was still sitting cross-legged on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by the evidence of her father's secret life. "Mom?" Her voice cut through my daze. "You've been up here for hours. Are you okay?" I looked up at my daughter, 43 years old now, her face showing the first signs of the same aging that had transformed my own face decades earlier. Thomas's daughter, his acknowledged child, the one he had raised and loved openly. "I'm fine," I lied. Gathering the items and returning them to the silver box just got lost in memories. That night, after Lizzie and her family had gone home, I sat at my kitchen table with Thomas's journal open before me, trying to reconcile the man I had loved with this new, complicated version of him. The anger came first, hot and righteous. 45 years of marriage, and he had kept this from me? Had lived a divided life while maintaining the facade of perfect honesty between us? Then came hurt, seeping into the cracks that anger left behind. Had he not trusted me enough to share this burden? Did he think I would have loved him less for a mistake made before we met? Did he believe me so small? I poured myself a second glass of Merlot and opened my laptop. It took only minutes to find them. Carolyn and Daniel Lucas of Columbus, Ohio. Her professional headshot showed a handsome woman with silver-streaked dark hair and confident eyes. His LinkedIn profile revealed a successful civil engineer, now a partner at a respected firm, married to Elizabeth, father to Sophia, now 6, and a younger son, Thomas. Thomas, they had named their son after a grandfather the boy would never know. I scrolled through the handful of public photos, studying the face of the man who shared my husband's blood, but not his name. I couldn't help but notice he had the same slight asymmetry to his smile that Thomas had, the right side lifting just a fraction higher than the left. The same smile I had kissed thousands of times without ever noticing this connection existed. On impulse, I clicked the message button on Daniel's profile and began typing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I wondered what I could possibly say to this stranger who was also family. "Dear Daniel, you don't know me, but my name is June Sullivan. I was married to Thomas Sullivan for 45 years until his passing this January. I believe he was your biological father." I deleted the message without sending it. Who was I to upend this man's life? Perhaps Carolyn had told him about Thomas years ago. Perhaps she had created a different story altogether. It wasn't my place to insert myself into their narrative. Instead, I opened a new browser tab and searched for information about the legal firm where Carolyn worked. Within minutes, I had drafted a different email. "Dear Miss Lucas, my name is June Sullivan. My husband, Thomas Sullivan, passed away in January of this year. Recently, while clearing out our home, I discovered information regarding a connection between Thomas and your son, Daniel. I have no intention of disrupting your lives, but I would appreciate an opportunity to speak with you privately, if you're willing. There are some items that Thomas kept which perhaps should rightfully belong to Daniel. Sincerely, June Sullivan." I included my phone number and sent the email before I could lose my courage. Then I returned the silver box to the attic and went to bed. 2 days later, my phone rang with an unfamiliar Columbus area code. "Hello?" My voice sounded thin in my own ears. "Mrs. Sullivan?" "This is Carolyn Lucas." Her voice was warm but cautious. "I received your email." "Thank you for calling," I said, my prepared script suddenly evaporating from my mind. I found Thomas's journal and the letters." A pause. Then, "I see." "He never told me," I said, and to my horror, I began to cry. Not delicate tears, but ugly, gulping sobs that had been building since that moment in the attic. 45 years, and he never told me about Daniel. To my surprise, it was Carolyn who comforted me. Thomas was a complicated man, Mrs. Sullivan. I learned that early on. When I had collected myself, Carolyn told me her side of the story. She had been a first-year law student when she met Thomas at a conference where he was presenting on education policy. He was separated from his first wife, a detail that shocked me, until I realized she was talking about Elaine, the college girlfriend Thomas had briefly married and divorced before meeting me. The timing made sense. The ink on his divorce papers had barely been dry when we met. It was brief but intense, Carolyn explained. When it ended and I discovered I was pregnant, Thomas was already engaged to you. He offered financial support, which I accepted, but we agreed he wouldn't be involved otherwise. It was a different time, Mrs. Sullivan. Did Daniel ever know? I asked. Not until he was 30, she replied. After my husband, the man who raised him as his own, passed away, Daniel had medical issues that required family history. That's when I told him about Thomas. Did he ever want to meet Thomas? He considered reaching out, Carolyn said carefully, but ultimately decided against it. He felt it might be disruptive to Thomas's family, to you and your children. The irony nearly took my breath away. Both father and son, protecting my feelings while denying themselves the chance to know each other. Mrs. Sullivan. June, please. June, she amended. May I ask why you're reaching out now? What is it you want? It was a fair question. What did I want? Validation of my anger? Someone to share in my sense of betrayal? Forgiveness for a husband who could no longer ask for it himself? Thomas kept things, I said finally. Letters he wrote to Daniel, but never sent. A watch that belonged to his father. I thought they should go to Daniel, if he wants them. Silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of 4 decades of parallel lives. I'm coming to Millfield next weekend, Carolyn said at last. My sister lives there. Perhaps we could meet? We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown. Neutral territory for this most unusual of conversations. After we hung up, I returned to the attic and opened the silver box again, this time seeing its contents through new eyes. The weekend arrived with unexpected sunshine after a week of spring rain. I chose my outfit carefully, a blue dress Thomas had always liked, pearl earrings, light makeup. I wanted to look put together, dignified, not like a woman whose life had been upended by secrets. I arrived at Rosemary's Cafe 20 minutes early and selected a quiet corner table with a view of the door. When Carolyn walked in, I recognized her immediately from her professional headshot, though in person, she moved with a graceful confidence her photograph hadn't captured. She wore a simple cream blouse and navy pants, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. I raised my hand, and our eyes met across the room. June, she said, extending her hand as she reached my table. Thank you for suggesting we meet. We ordered coffee and exchanged pleasantries about the weather, about her drive from Columbus, about the charm of Millfield's historic downtown. Finally, when the awkward small talk exhausted itself, I opened my purse and removed a small package wrapped in tissue paper. These are Thomas's letters, I said, placing it on the table between us. All of them, and his father's watch. I thought Daniel might want them. Carolyn didn't reach for the package immediately. Instead, she looked at me with kind eyes that reminded me, strangely, of my late husband's. This can't be easy for you. No, I admitted. It isn't. May I ask, are you angry with Thomas? The question caught me off guard. Was I angry? Yes, of course. But also hurt, confused, and strangely guilty, as if I had somehow failed my husband by not creating an environment where he felt safe sharing this truth with me. I'm angry that he never trusted me enough to tell me, I said finally. We could have faced this together, maybe even found a way to acknowledge Daniel properly. Carolyn nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think Thomas's silence came from a place of love. Misguided perhaps, but genuine. He was terrified of losing you. He would never have lost me over something that happened before we met, I insisted. Are you sure? Her question was gentle but pointed. The Thomas I knew was deeply conventional, concerned with appearances and propriety. He once told me his greatest fear was disappointing the people who depended on him. I thought about the man I had married, the respected educator, the pillar of our community. The father who had taught our children about integrity and accountability. How had he reconciled those values with his secret? Did Daniel ever resent him, I asked, for staying away? Carolyn considered this. Not resent, exactly. Daniel had a good father in my husband, Rick. But I think he always felt there was a piece of himself he couldn't quite access. When I finally told him about Thomas, there was a sense of recognition. Like finding the missing piece to a puzzle he hadn't known was incomplete. She reached into her handbag and removed a photograph, sliding it across the table to me. This is Daniel with his family, last Christmas. A handsome man in his late 30s stood with his arm around a pretty blonde woman. Before them were 2 children, a girl with dark curls who looked about 6, and a toddler boy with the same cowlick that had plagued Thomas all his life. They're beautiful. I whispered. Little Thomas is the spitting image of his grandfather, Carolyn said with a small smile. Same stubborn streak too, according to Daniel. Does he know about this meeting? Carolyn nodded. I called him after we spoke. He was interested. Cautious, but interested. She reached for the package I'd brought, her fingers hovering over it briefly before making contact. He asked me to thank you for this, for thinking of him. There's something else, I said, my heart suddenly racing. I hadn't planned this next part, had barely allowed myself to consider it until this moment. Would Daniel, do you think he might want to meet? Not right away, but perhaps someday. Carolyn's eyes widened slightly. You would want that? They're family, I said simply. My grandchildren have a cousin they've never met, a cousin named for their grandfather. I'll ask him, Carolyn promised. Then, with careful deliberation, she added, and June. Thomas kept this secret to protect what he had with you. Whatever else you discover, please don't doubt that he loved you. We parted with an awkward hug and a promise to stay in touch. As I watched her walk away, the package of letters secure in her elegant leather bag, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of understanding. On the drive home, I thought about the silver box in the attic, now half empty. Thomas's journal remained, his private thoughts not meant for Daniel, but perhaps important for me to understand the husband I thought I had known completely. The house felt different when I returned, less a museum to my marriage and more what it truly was, a structure of wood and brick that had witnessed both joy and secrecy, laughter and lies. I could finally see it objectively, this place that had sheltered us while Thomas carried his burden alone. That evening, I called my daughter Lizzie and invited her to dinner the following night. It was time to tell my children about their half-brother, not to tarnish their father's memory, but to expand our understanding of the complicated, imperfect man he had been. The conversation was difficult, as I had expected. Lizzie cried. My son Mark, joining by video call from Seattle, sat in stunned silence for long minutes before asking practical questions, the engineer in him seeking structure amid emotional chaos. "So we have a brother," he said finally. "A brother who has never met us, who didn't even know about Dad until a few years ago." "Half-brother," Lizzie corrected, still processing. "He has children," I told them. "Your niece and nephew. Sophia is 6. Little Thomas is 2. "Thomas," Mark repeated, his voice catching. "They named him after Dad." Are we going to meet them?" Lizzie asked cautiously. "That's up to all of you," I replied. "And to Daniel and his wife, of course. But I hope so. Life is too short for walls where bridges could stand instead." Mark, always the practical one, suggested a video call first. Baby steps toward whatever relationship might be possible. 3 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, my children and I gathered in my living room around my laptop. My hands trembled as I clicked the link Carolyn had sent. The screen flickered, and suddenly there they were. Carolyn, Daniel, his wife Elizabeth, and their 2 children, all seated on a blue sofa in a sunlit living room in Columbus. "Hello," Daniel said, his voice a deeper version of the one that had narrated my dreams for 45 years. It's good to meet you all." For a moment, no one spoke. We all stared, taking in the features shared across generations and marriages. Thomas's chin on Daniel, his eyes on little Sophia, his cowlick on toddler Thomas. "I'm June," I said finally, breaking the silence. "Thomas's wife, and these are your siblings, Lizzie and Mark." The conversation that followed was awkward at times, halting as we navigated the strange territory between strangers and family. But by the end of the hour, Lizzie had arranged to send Daniel copies of childhood photos, and Mark had discovered they shared not only a biological father, but a passion for structural engineering. As we said our goodbyes, promising to speak again soon, Daniel looked directly at me through the screen. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for reaching out, for being okay with this." "I'm still working on okay," I admitted, "but I'm glad to know you exist, Daniel. Thomas should have been proud to claim you." After the call ended, my children and I sat in contemplative silence. Finally, Lizzie spoke. "Dad made a mistake, a big one, but look what came from it. Daniel seems like a good person. Those beautiful children. Maybe some secrets should be found." The following week, I signed the papers to sell the Victorian house where Thomas and I had raised our family. The silver box came with me to my new condo. Not hidden in an attic, but placed on a shelf in my bedroom where I could see it, a reminder of the complex truth of my marriage. I enrolled in a writing class at the Senior Center. Our first assignment was to write about a significant life event. I titled my piece "The Silver Box in the Attic," and found, to my surprise, that the words flowed easily, filling page after page with my journey from betrayal towards something like peace. "This is powerful stuff, June," my instructor said after class. "You have a real voice. Have you considered sharing your story more widely? There are many women who might find comfort in knowing they're not alone in discovering that long marriages held secrets." I hadn't considered it, but the idea took root, not to expose Thomas's flaws to the world, but to explore the complicated reality that most marriages contain hidden corners, some harmless, some profound, some devastating. 6 months after finding the silver box, I started a blog called Late Discoveries. I shared my story, changing names and certain details out of respect for all involved. To my astonishment, women responded, hundreds of them, then thousands, sharing their own stories of secrets uncovered, of reckonings with deceased spouses who could no longer explain or apologize. I published my first essay collection at 70. The dedication read, "For Thomas, who I loved completely but knew incompletely, and for Daniel, Sophia, and young Thomas, the unexpected branches of our family tree." Daniel and his family came to my book launch in Columbus. We had met in person several times by then, our relationship evolving into something neither of us could have imagined. Not quite mother and son, but more than mere acquaintances, connected by a man now gone. "Do you think he would have hated this?" Daniel asked me quietly as we watched our extended family mingle at the reception. His children playing with Lizzie's teenagers, his wife deep in conversation with Mark about sustainable building materials. All of us together like this? I considered the question carefully. The Thomas I knew would have been terrified of this moment, I admitted. But I like to think that somewhere, the Thomas who might have been, the one who found the courage to unite all parts of his life, is smiling. Last spring, on the 3rd anniversary of Thomas's death, we all gathered at our new tradition, a family picnic at Knollfield Park. 4 generations present, from Carolyn, who had become an unexpected friend, to baby James, Mark's newest grandson. Little Thomas, now 5, came running up to me with a fistful of dandelions. "For you, Grandma June," he said, using the name we had all settled on after much discussion. I accepted the weedy bouquet with the solemnity it deserved. "Thank you, Thomas. They're beautiful." "They're just weeds," he said, echoing something an adult had clearly told him. But Dad says sometimes the things people call weeds are actually the strongest plants in the garden. Out of the mouths of babes, I looked around at our unusual family gathering, the product of mistakes, secrets, forgiveness, and growth. Daniel caught my eye from across the picnic table and raised his lemonade glass in a small toast. I nodded in acknowledgement. Thomas's secret had nearly remained buried forever. How different all our lives would have been had I never ventured into that attic, never found that silver box. I might have lived out my remaining years believing I had known my husband completely. Daniel might never have held the letters that told him, in Thomas's own words, that he had been thought of, wondered about, loved from afar. The silver box now sits on my writing desk, empty of its original contents, but filled with new mementos. Photos of Daniel's family, drawings from Sophia and little Thomas, the program from my book launch. Not a box of secrets anymore, but a treasure chest of second chances. Sometimes I talk to Thomas in the quiet moments before sleep claims me. I tell him about Daniel's promotion, about Sophia's talent for mathematics, about little Thomas's latest adventures. I tell him I understand why he was afraid, even as I wish he had trusted me more. And sometimes, in the space between wakefulness and dreams, I imagine I hear him answer, not with apologies or explanations, but with the simple acknowledgement that echoes through the life I've built since finding that silver box in the attic. It's never too late to discover the truth. It's never too late to expand the circle of family. It's never too late to become the author of your own story. Soon, make yourself confident.